we're purpose built. And what I mean by purpose built is we actually sat down with a team of data scientists and we looked at the problem and we said, how do we solve this problem from a first principles perspective?
Welcome to UpTech Report. This is our Applied Tech series. UpTech Report is sponsored by TerraLeap. Learn how to leverage the power of video at terraleap.io. Today, I'm joined by my guest, Jerry Ting, who's based in San Francisco. He's the co-founder and CEO of Evisort. Welcome, Jerry. Good to have you on, man.
Alex, good to be on.
Now, Evisort, your platform, as states on your site, is an AI-powered contract management platform, basically helping those companies out there organize and figure out what is all that important data contained in your legal documents. Your target market, those that you're helping, is definitely enterprise and upper mid-market. But help me understand the intelligent contract management platform. That's what you state. And in our conversations before our interview here, we were talking about, okay, what is AI? I mean, how can you really say what is AI? Is it just a marketing term? Tell me, what did you go into building Evisort? What was the mindset you had and the problem you're trying to solve?
Yeah, I never wanted to start a company. That's the
way to
that's the
start.
funny
Okay.
thing. Yeah, I was going to be a lawyer, and I think that's sort of what resonates with, what is real AI versus what is fake AI. Is for me, I'm a straight shooter. Right? I'm black text law, if you will. And so for me, I was in law school and I was studying to become a lawyer. I wanted to be a startup lawyer. I wanted to work with folks who work with technology, and I quickly learned that the practice of law was so manual. Right? What you have to do is, let's say you're negotiating a lease for your apartment. You sit down as a lawyer and you open a 200-page document and you're reading. Can you put a sticky note on the wall? If it takes off some paint, are you gonna get in trouble, right? And it's so manual. And I sat there as a lawyer and I said, wow, this is a very tedious task, and also it's a very expensive task. I went to a good law school, was going to work in a big law firm in New York, and you're going to charge people hundreds of dollars an hour to review documents. And so I thought, hey, there has to be a better way of doing this. And I was volunteering actually in the Boston community to help founders start companies. And one of my clients was actually a researcher at MIT, and he was actually working on AI research. And so I went to him and I said, look, you go to MIT, clearly you're pretty caught up with the recent technology.
Yeah.
What is AI? Can it actually help lawyers do their work? And that's how the company got started, was based on my personal experience being a lawyer and reviewing contracts and helping my clients. And my client and I actually got together and started building a company to solve that cause. And so that's
Great. Beginning story. Teaming up with a client where who understands the technology, you see the need, and you're like, I don't want to do all this manual labor that just wastes people's money and my time. And that's where, hey, we like technology. We can automate and simplify our lives. We can focus on what we can do better. But help me understand. Let's dig into a bit further. Okay, what is true AI? And there's, you had mentioned earlier in our conversations about, there's legacy players that come in here and then slap on maybe some regression systems or whatever, and it's 40% accurate. And then say, we've got AI. Okay, what's the difference? Like, how can you tell what is true AI? And like, who defines the term?
Yeah, it's not a regulated term. So it's whatever your marketing team wants to define as AI, which I think hurts consumers, right? Because so for us, we sell to enterprises and we sell to mid-market clients. For some of them, it's the first time that they've ever seen a intelligent system like this before. And so for them, they are looking at maybe 4 or 5 different systems side by side. And for us, we're purpose built. And what I mean by purpose built is we actually sat down with a team of data scientists and we looked at the problem and we said, how do we solve this problem from a first principles perspective? How do we actually use math, and how do we use deep learning and machine learning? And for us, because we look at language, how do you use natural language processing, which is a part of AI? How do you use that field to do linguistical analysis, right? It's a totally different approach than if it's another system that is more of a database system, and then they put on some rule-based approaches on top. I'll give you a simple example. sometimes we look at purchase orders. And one of the things our clients need us to take out of a purchase order is the name of the vendor that you're paying. Simple problem, right? For a lot of our clients, actually, the purchase order is standardized. It's on their form. So their accounting department issues the purchase order, their procurement department issues the purchase order. And on the top left-hand side, it will say the name of the vendor. Let's say the name of the vendor is Salesforce. Right? So it says vendor colon Salesforce. Anybody can pull that out, even a non-AI vendor, right? Because you just say, look to the top left, and you just set a set of business logics that can look at the top left. What happens if it goes and it moves to the top right? What happens if it goes to the 14th page and is buried in a paragraph? That's when you separate the real AI vendors from the quasi AI
Voice
vendors,
from the men,
so to speak.
Yeah,
exactly.
when it comes to AI. Interesting an analogy is helpful because there are I've talked to a few vendors where they talk about, well, yeah, it as long as it's always in the same place, it'll be able to pick it out. But if it's all, it could be different each time. That's, you're saying, is true AI. So you believe that there should be more regulation on being able to use the term AI?
I do, because I think for us right now, we're still in the nascency of AI and its maturity and its application to society. Right. So, AI has been talked about for the last 10 years or so. Really, it's been the last 5 years where we've seen a real impact on human life. Um, I drive a Tesla, for example, right? And I rely on the car to make some decisions on the freeway. I'm still present, my hand is still on the wheel, but when it's going around a turn, I put my life at stake going 65 to 70 miles an hour, relying on camera sensors and an AI based system. And so I think as AI becomes more prevalent in our life, it is no longer an academic term that folks like you and I, who are nerds on the topic, that we care about, right? It impacts our parents, it impacts our family, and I think it impacts how we do work. And so for that reason, I think having some regulation around how you define AI and how you talk about accuracy and safety, I think those are important areas where you got to draw a line in the sand. Where is it actually accurate, or is it just a legacy system that's a rule-based logic pretending to be an AI system? And I think the purpose of that regulation is to guide consumers so that they know how to rely on the system and how not to rely on the system.
Until regulation appears, eventually, I imagine it will. How can a company, a business leader themselves be able to compare apples to apples, or rather apples to oranges here, of, okay, is this truly an AI solution? I mean, what are some giveaways?
Yeah, I one of my first clients, she taught me a phrase that I never forgot. She was general counsel of a company, and she said, "I like it when we do it the Missouri way." And I said, "What's the Missouri way?" And she says, "Well, that's the show me state." And what she meant by that is, I'm going to give you 5 contracts that you've never seen before, scanned from different systems, written by different lawyers. You say you're good at pulling data out of contracts. Let's upload it and let's see. Right? And when I look at the results, there's no funny business. Don't leave the room. Upload it right here and let's take a look at the results. And I think that was a really good learning lesson for us, because we started telling other clients, hey, there are people who say they do AI. Sure, we're not the only ones, right? There's others out there, but there's not 200. There's only a couple that really do it. And so what I encourage you is, whether you work with us or don't, do it the Missouri way. Upload some data. Let's test it, right? Let's see what it actually does. And for me, from a personal perspective, when I first started driving my car, I was really nervous. I gotta be honest with you, Alex. I was driving and I was holding on. I was more nervous with the AI system in the Tesla than when I didn't have an AI system, because I didn't know, am I going to crash into a wall or not? But over time, as I went through turns, as I went through different sections of the highway, I realized that the system's pretty accurate. And then that's when I was able to kind of relax a little bit and let the system do what it's meant to do. Same with using Evisort, same with using any other system, is that you got to let it prove itself. And if it can't prove itself, then maybe there's some smoke and mirrors happening here.
It's a powerful thing. Just show me, take it for a test drive, so to speak, or literal if you're actually driving a Tesla. some giveaways. Something that you talked about also is, when you look at the founders, the people who start an AI or ML company, do they have a PhD in math? And like, help me understand, like, why do you said that earlier before we started the interview? Why did you say that?
Yeah, I think it's because AI is still a new field. I mean, for us, my co-founder was doing research at MIT. He was actually part of the academic research groups, writing papers, contributing to research, and I think it's a different type of thinking when you're a statistician or a mathematician or a data scientist versus when you are a software developer focusing on building software. Not to say one is better or worse than the other, it's just different, right? One's a tennis player, one's a basketball player, and it's sometimes you can cross over, but it's harder, right? One has a racket and one has basketball, and so for me, because AI is so new, right? There's been a lot of hype around generalizable AI. Big tech companies, including some that we partner with, talk about building AI research that you could just, as a software developer, take off the shelf, aim it at a set of problems, and then build AI magically, right? Um, in our experience, in our testing, that has not been the case. When you take, I won't say the names of the big tech companies because we're partners with almost all of them. But when you take something that's not built for a particular set of challenges, you take it off the shelf, and then you just give it some training data as a software developer, and then you test it. The accuracy rates are all over the place, right? It works really well on some things, works quite poorly on others. And so for us, I think, I speak with a lot of folks who run AI focused companies. We call it applied AI. I think you and I talked about that. What is academic AI versus what's applied AI? For us, our AI was built from the ground up looking at contracts, right? I'm a lawyer, I'm a subject matter expert. I'm working with a data scientist who's actually inventing algorithms, and we're doing live testing side by side, right? And until the thing passes the human eye test, which is the most important test in AI, it doesn't leave the lab. And I think that that's a really important way of thinking about it.
Another topic we talked about earlier, and I want to dig into here, is the automation versus augmented and augmentation of like how much do you automate something versus someone is involved. And this, again, we can go back to the car analogy, your Tesla, I imagine. To what degree do you feel comfortable and safe to let it just do its thing versus when do you feel, okay, a person needs to be involved in here? And especially when it comes to contracts, where's the balance and where's the handoff?
Yeah. I always think that there's going to be a role for humans in an AI-based society. I'm a lawyer. There's things I learned in law school where there's no way AI would know that. I was lucky to be taught by folks. So I went to Harvard for law school, and my first year contracts professor taught Obama, and the lessons that you learned in that classroom, and AI would never know, right? And when you get into decision making formats where you have to think back to the human components of making decisions, and AI will never know, right? And for me, I have so much respect for lawyers because of what they do on a day-to-day basis. There's also things they do on a day-to-day basis that they don't want to be doing, and they are doing, right? And I laugh a lot when I hang out with my friends at the bar after work, and I say, "Well, do you want to be doing that?" They say, "Geez, no, get me out of here," right? And so for me, the role of augmentation versus automation is better for simple, repetitive tasks that don't require decision making. An example might be you go to a vending machine, you put in a dollar bill, and a Coke comes out. That's full automation. You don't need to go in there and check, hey, did you choose the right bottle of Coke or did you choose a Sprite? There is like a rule-based logic that Coke is in the same canister every time, right? And that's good for automation. When you're doing something like driving, or you're reviewing a contract that has $100 million attached to that, it's worth having a human check the outputs sometimes when the system is doing complicated decision making. Like for example, when I'm driving, right? Elon Musk is a visionary. I look up to his vigor and his work. But he never says go to sleep when you're driving a Tesla because somebody might die. And I think that that's an area where augmentation is better than automation. In consulting, where I had some background, there's a rule called the 80-20 rule. How do you focus on 80% of value and then don't forget it. Just kind of let the 20% go to the wayside, right? But don't solve for 100%. If you solve for 100% every time, you're not going to get out of the garage. And so for me, I think when you're designing systems, automated intelligent systems, the design principle that we use is how do we get rid of the 80% so that you can focus on the 20% actually, which is where human decision making is very relevant. And I think that's the difference between automation and augmentation. And in my perspective, I think augmentation is just as effective as automation for real life applications of AI.
You mentioned earlier that you have several partners and partnerships. What's your integrations look like? Obviously, with contracts, it's important that there's a flow of information always coming in and going out. What type of the things have you found that are integrating with and are planning on?
Yeah, this is an area where I think you hear the phrase SaaS, and then you hear this phrase AI, and then you say, is AI part of SaaS or SaaS part of AI? And I think it's actually that's a longer debate. But for us, when I go into client organizations, right, we have so many clients who use Salesforce, they use Ariba, they use Tableau and Power BI for visualization. They have accounting systems. They have Workday. Right? If you think about the last 20 years of software development and the migration from on-premise to cloud, right? That's sort of the SaaS generation, if you will. I think we're at the tail end of that. I think we're entering now the AI plus SaaS generation, where systems are now naturally intelligent, right? You think about a system like ours, you think about systems like we use Gong, for example, for sales recordings. It actually tells you, hey, what should you say? What should you not say? Right. So I think our systems are now moving all towards more intelligent system. So to your point, it's really important for an AI vendor like us to integrate with the Salesforces, the Microsofts, the Tableaus of the world, because that's where business is currently done today, because those are the incumbent players. And for us, that's where data lives. A lot of data is manually entered into these other systems, whether they're downstream systems or upstream systems. And for us to be an intelligent node that connects these different systems, we actually make these other systems better because we can actually supply data into your Salesforce to help your sales teams have more information and to help your sales teams actually close deals more quickly. And I think that that's a very interesting synergy, right? We call it frenemies, if you will, friends and enemies, right? You got to play well with other folks that you're integrating with, but sometimes you're going to have overlapping value props where you say, hey, I'm going to own this value prop, and I don't want to integrate that with a SaaS system. I think that's a ever evolving synergy that I think actually helps consumers because you're actually expanding the pie with what's valuable to them.
What can you share of your roadmap? What's coming up? What's an exciting feature that is just come out or will be coming out that you can talk about?
Yeah, I'm gonna get in trouble with my R&D team, but I'll go ahead and talk about it. For us, there is always been a gap in the legal technology industry of can an AI actually negotiate a contract? We can now, we're at the stage now where we can pull data out. We can tell you what it says. We can tell you if you put in a contract, who's it with, when does it expire, what are the key risks? We can tell you all that already. That wasn't possible 5 years ago. The next step is, can I use an AI to negotiate against a human? And that's where it starts to get really interesting, this line of human intelligence versus artificial intelligence. I'll say here that we've actually started already doing this at one of the biggest banks in the world, where they are negotiating 400-page contracts using Evisort as a part of the negotiation framework, where we can actually look at the comments that the other party made, whether the other party is a bank or an asset manager, and this large bank sends out a contract, it comes back negotiated with red lines, right? The counterparty has some edits to make. We can actually look at those edits. We can tell you, hey, does it comply with your contracting policies or does it not? And if it doesn't, what should you ask for instead? And I think that that's really interesting because that's kind of like the Tesla driving by itself with you supervising it. We're going to be releasing that to all of our clients in the next 12 months.
So basically, as the contracts come in, it's highlighting with changes that they've asked for and giving you already suggestions of based off of what you say you want, you could reply with this, doing all that for you, with you then being able to reply manually.
Exactly.
Well, that is exciting. Is in that direction of automated pilot, Tesla mindsets when it comes to contracts. I I like the future that you paint, that it's applied AI. Like it's something that actually is making our lives better, but there's still a lot of room for growth in the direction of where things are headed. For those that are involved with legal documents, whether it's in marketing, procurement, sales, or legal, obviously, is there any words of advice that you would give to a business leader in any of these departments when it comes to contracts and the future of how to manage them?
Yeah, I think for if you think about it, anyone that touches a contract cares about the data inside of a contract. I've never gone into a company and they said we don't care what's in our contracts. Has never happened, right? Because every time a company buys something or sells something or hires somebody, there's a paper trail. That data is very valuable. That data could, I think, move stock markets. And so I think for folks who are thinking about managing data inside of contracts, if you find yourself or your teams or your partners and your other departments that you may work with manually reading contracts and then typing data into a database, you gotta, I urge you to stop and think, is that the best use of time? Or should we think about how do we actually augment that with an AI-based system so that your teams are actually looking at the data and then maybe making decisions with that data? I'll give you an example. We this week I actually met with the chief procurement officer of a Fortune 100 company, and the officer said, "I want to take out over $100 million of savings in the next couple of years." And they asked me, "How do you do that?" And I said, "That's actually, it sounds lofty, but it's actually a data question. It's not a question about strategy. The procurement plays that everyone else knows, other people know how to do this. But the question is, how do you get the data, right? There's three main use cases in procurement where you can use data to drive cost savings. One is managing your contracts and your expirations effectively. If you don't want a service, you don't want a piece of software, and you miss the expiration date, you're on the hook for another 12 months, right? That could be $100,000, that could be $1 million, or worse, if you miss the expiration date, depending on the terms of the contract, you may be on the hook for another 3 years. And so let's at least get that house cleaned up, right? That's the first bucket. The next bucket, there's a big trend in procurement right now to consolidate spending. SaaS was such a prevalent growth space where you take a big company like a Fortune 100, different managers maybe all bought different licenses of Salesforce because they needed it for different use cases. Marketing needed it for marketing, sales needed it for sales, different regions of sales, North America versus APAC versus EMEA. There may be 10 different licenses to Salesforce, all with no discounts. As a procurement officer, you want to go across your entire company and figure out, hey, can we get one license and can we negotiate 30% off? There's another couple $1 million of savings, right? And then the third bucket, I'm just illustrating a point here of how data can be used to drive business. Another third bucket is there's rebate tables. In vendor contracts, you have rebate tables where if you're a large company, you spend $1 million with us, you get back $50,000. Right? If you spend 1.5 million, you get back $100,000. There's literally a table of if you spend so much, compare it with how much you spent in the APAR system, and then you can actually collect a rebate. Companies usually don't do that. They negotiate for rebates, and then they never actually go and collect the rebates. Another couple millions of dollars. You can see how when you're looking at data that's basically dollars are represented in text, how if you analyze that text, you can drive really large savings and efficiencies for companies. And that's what gets me excited about AI. It's not the math, it's not the Sigma notations that my data scientists are putting on whiteboards. I don't really understand most of that, to be honest. They draw the most fancy graphs, right? But for me, if you take that and you don't apply it to a business challenge, you're missing the point. Mm-hmm. It's about how do you take best in class R&D, apply it to a business challenge that is very valuable, very legacy, has been done manually or not done at all. And when you combine the two, I think you see the future. And I think that's the direction the world is going right now.
I love the future that you paint, and I am 100% with you on applied solutions. It's wonderful theoretical and research because that paves the way for things. But when they actually get applied, that's when life ideally becomes easier and people's lives can be more focused on things that they can do better and themselves. Thanks again, Jerry, for this advice. For those that want to learn more about Evisort, you can go to evisort.com, Evisort, and be able to get a demo there. And for those who want to hear more about Jerry's journey and some of the insights he's had over the past few years building Evisort, stick around for part 2 for our Founders Journey interview series. Thanks again, Jerry. And everyone, we'll see you on the next episode. Have you seen a company using AI, machine learning, or other technology to transform the way we live, work, and do business? Go to uptechreport.com and let us know.